You know, there are so many other cool things I could be talking about right now. The Logan trailer looks great. Nintendo continues to be amazing at selling me things. I could review Doctor Who or Danganronpa like I've been meaning to for months. At the rate I'm working, the class premiere will probably have passed by the time this video goes up. But no, instead, the brain-dead excuse for Amuse running my faculties demands that I talk about my experience in the theater with this thing. Okay, so maybe the title of this video is a little bit hyperbolic. Maybe I was just put in a laughing mood because this thing was preceded by the cringiest and most hilariously schmaltzy trailers possible. You put the resolution of the movie and the main character arc in the trailer, what are you doing? But seriously, even without that little primer, I get the feeling that my thoughts on this movie would be about the same, because this is one of the most ridiculous movies I've ever seen! I've seen a couple of worse movies than Miss Peregrine's this year, but this is the first time in a long time I can remember paying money for something so cringy. So Jake is this dork who in his youth was told stories by his grandpappy of weird kids hunted by weird monsters in a weird house owned by a weird lady called Miss Peregrine. When Jake sees one of the monsters kill his grandpa, his psychiatrist suggests that he and his disbelieving drunk of a father visit the now bombed out home in Wales in order to come to terms with his grandfather's death. Surprise, surprise, Jake finds out that the old house isn't bombed out, or well, it is now, but it wasn't back then.
Not now, but it was back then. Well, back now from your point of view, which is back then from my point of view. Time travel, you can't keep it straight in your head.
See, the house and all of its inhabitants are in one of the many stable time loops, home to mutants, peculiars, perpetually stuck in the same day in 1943, and those same monsters are still after them, this time with a master plan with Jake at the center. Asa Butterfield is bad. Like, really bad. Like, from word one, he has by far the worst line deliveries in this movie, maybe the worst acting performance in a film all year. And yes, I'm including the likes of Cara Delevingne in Suicide Squad and J. Law and Sophie Turner in X-Men Apocalypse. In terms of character, Jake has the typical average nobody loner realizes he's actually super duper special and accepts that striving to be normal is for losers while simultaneously accepting a leadership role arc. So far, so Tim Burton. But Jake's character growth, if it can be called that, is so underplayed that he's mostly just there to be the most plain audience surrogate possible. And none of the other kids really have any character outside of one or two traits, most of which take the form of their superpowers and are thus only intriguing for like one scene. Oh, look how funny it is that the little girl has super strength, or that the other little girl has a big mouth in the back of her head, or the one boy who's obsessed with clothes. The only remotely intriguing character dynamics revolve entirely around Jake's grandfather Abe and how the two of them compare. This leads to pretty much all of the character relationships in the film falling flat, including both of the movie's token romances, because no one here feels like a real person with their own things going on. Then there's Miss Peregrine herself, and considering she's the title character, I'm honestly kind of shocked at how little screen time she has through the whole movie. A lot of this comes down to the film's first act being incredibly bloated, so it's a long time before we even meet her. But even once we do, she doesn't really leave an impression. You can tell Eva Green is attempting to inject a really memorable character in here, but her scenes are so sparse and her dialogue so exposition-heavy that she comes off incredibly generic. All you have to do is take one look at her and you can probably tell her entire character. Dignified and maternal, but oh, so quirky and gothic. Nothing about her goes far beyond an archetype, and while, like I said, that's true of all these guys, you'd expect her to be the one exception. You know, the big personality that overwhelms the entire show, steals all the scenes they're in, the one that all the effort clearly went into making as memorable as possible to make up for the rest of the movie's lack of memorability. Unmemorableness? I don't know. But no, for what surprisingly little time we spend with her, she's mostly just there. Instead, the holder of the most interesting character title and the biggest bright spot in the film is Samuel L. Jackson, who's still an incredibly flat character, but is at least the only one in the movie who seems remotely aware of how completely camp the material is. I swear, like 90% of his lines had to have been ad-libbed or written by some second writer who felt obligated to point and laugh at the surrounding material, which is either boring and saccharine or
dangerously cheesy.
Unfortunately, there's the compound issue that even though he's the antagonist, never once is Jackson's character remotely threatening. Same goes for his flunkies, who can turn into giant monster things except when they can't, or maybe some of them are stuck that way and some aren't, because they need to eat the eyes of other peculiars in order to be semi-normal again, but why? Forget it, I'm not going down that rabbit hole. That thing about the eyes is also the singular reason that this movie is rated PG-13, by the way, and it's stuff like that that has me wishing I'd watched the far more macabre, far more memorably morbid movie that I think this was trying to be before it got bored with itself. So there are the flat characters, and then there are the characters who go nowhere, who are also still, flat. There's no closure with Jake's dad. None! The last time we see him is around the middle of the film, just before the villain is properly introduced. Why is he in this movie? The fact that we're doing nothing with this character is seriously bothering me. We spend all this time setting up the relationship, or lack of one, between he and Jake, and he's just dropped completely by the end, not even mentioned. Jake's mom isn't even mentioned beyond her one scene toward the beginning. One of the young girls at the house has a deceased brother who a big deal gets made out of before he's never brought up again, a beat where the love interest expresses dissatisfaction with being kept out of time for all eternity, but then she's just over it. So much stuff that seems like it's going to a place goes completely nowhere. I swear this is just one reason I'm convinced that there are like a million scenes missing from this film. Reason 2 is that the editing is beyond choppy. So many scenes transition in the most jarring way possible. Are we in the house? Are we out of the house? Why did we leave the house? This scene is here for no reason. Some of these cuts are so distracting. Little note, it's usually not a great idea to make it so that your audience has to spend more than 5 or so seconds reorienting themselves in time and space just because you couldn't be bothered to use an establishing shot. There's also a heaping of convolutedness to be found in the movie's time travel mechanics. Like, oh geez, around the time we get to the third act, it's so needlessly complicated that I honestly think the movie would have been better off scrapping the whole temporal manipulation plot device altogether for all the good it does. So like, time inside the loop runs concurrently with time outside the loop, so everyone's literally decades old, and if they step outside the loop, then the years catch up with them and they die. Okay, simple enough, got it. But then, 2/3 through the movie, the loop closes and everyone is just fine. They're just fine, and I think the movie is trying to imply some kind of explanation, but we never really talk about it. And there are other loops, so they go from a loop in 1943 to a loop in 2016, and I guess it doesn't matter which loop they're in, they'll stay the same age so long as they're in a loop at all, regardless of time period. But then also, why didn't they just go to a different loop or make a new one if they didn't want to be stuck in the 40s forever in the first place? Is this my fault? Did I just forget or turn my brain off at the wrong time because I was distracted by all the other stupid stuff? Like, do I just need to watch it again to pay special attention for those plot details? Whatever explanation we're given goes by in like a millisecond. Also, back on the technical side of things, there's nothing particularly impressive about the film's visuals. The closest it gets to being actually sort of fun is in the second act when it becomes an almost straightforward kid's adventure romp for like 2 scenes. But even those sequences are marred by mediocrity. One of the hologhasts, the monsters that like to eat eyeballs, shows up in a way that's meant to be surprising, but thanks to staging and oh so ironic dialogue, is entirely predictable. Grabs one of the kids and spends almost a solid minute knocking them into walls instead of just eating their eyes and getting it over with. I don't understand why you don't just eat him. Just eat him. Burton, you know there's nothing noteworthy about seeing characters get tossed around by an invisible figure anymore, right? This isn't a neat visual trick by 2016 standards, and the only reason I bother to point that out is because that's the only conceivable reason you'd spend like 5 million years on that scene. So there's this bomb that gets dropped on the house at the end of every loop, and Miss Peregrine resets the day every night just as it's about to make impact. The whole being chased by the monster sequence ends with this bomb finally dropping, and believe me when I say that it does blow, it's a pretty major letdown. I get that it's maybe more realistic, but I can't help but be completely dragged out of the movie when this is the first of 2 action scenes in the whole thing, and it ends with a literal bang that feels more like a whimper. There's also the score, which is weak. That means a lot coming from me, I think, since I've reveled in movie scores that most others have found completely unmemorable. The music playing over top the opening credits lets you know what you're in for, and as if to encapsulate the feel of the whole movie, the sound is so indicative of the usual Tim Burton flavor minus any punch that it's hard to take seriously. I feel like I'm not doing my experience with this movie justice. I've been disappointed a lot with some of this year's films, but there's a unique brand of silliness to Miss Peregrine's Home for Peculiar Children. The really lame kind of silliness that makes it only enjoyable ironically when it isn't being super boring. I didn't expect to get such catharsis out of roasting this movie of all movies, especially since I don't think it's as actively bad as a lot of the other movies or episodes of TV I've raged at or expressed disappointment in this year. But I'm still just flabbergasted that I paid money, sat down in a theater, and this is what I saw. It's just so lame.